You might have thought there's enough videos on how a guy can get a router insert plate to fit in a tabletop, but you were wrong. Here's another one. Let's see what I can come up with for doing this in a little bit different way than the way the other guys are doing. Also, a little bit the same way, but there are some differences. You're watching On the Mark with Mark. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mask off the areas that I can't put my router plate in, because I've got some requirements under the table, some interference points. If you look here, I've got these ribs right here, and then this is the area where I've doubled up the thickness of the plywood. This is where the insert plate can go, right here. But we also have to miss these diagonal braces that I put in, and also that piece of angle iron right there. Well, so much for wanting to have it closer in this direction than over there. That was my original idea, because I didn't want to have to lean over the table so far to work with the thing. So this is not the one I'm going to use, but this is the same size. So it can go anywhere inside here, but I certainly don't want it clear over there. But I need to see if my router fence that I worked on in the previous episode actually will line up to this, because it's a little further out than the center. I certainly don't want to try going this way. That pushes it out even further. So let me see what my fence will do. Yeah, luckily it does go over far enough. It's a little easier to see from that angle, but this fence has this much adjustment to it, and I have the insert as close to this side as I can get it, and you can see there's, I don't know, there might be a ½ inch. Yeah, probably a full inch. So that actually might be a good point for maybe just moving this over a ½ inch and having that be where this goes. One of the things that's making this a little more difficult is this diagonal support that I've got going across here. And you may be wondering why I have that there. And that's because I do have a sort of a mobile base on this. You see those wheels over here. There's 2 of those wheels. And the idea I had was that I would be able to lift up the saw from that end and then 2-wheel it around when I needed to move it out of the way. That's the reason why I added this piece of angle iron across the back side, so that all of the weight wasn't just on this aluminum extrusion there, because it's kind of a good idea to keep that straight. So that's something that I could lift in my younger days, but it was difficult back then. I don't know if I could even do it now. I did have a plan at one point to have some kind of a wheeled jacking system down at that far end that I could crank it up on a scissor jack and then move it around. But really, the solution is don't move it around. That's mainly what I do now. But I don't want to take that angle iron off if I don't have to. So that's one of the things that I've got to miss. Now, it's easy for the router itself. If you look at this lift, it's going to be easy for it to miss. But I am going to be building a box that will cover this on the bottom side that will be for dust collection. So that's kind of where I need to be staying away from that. And I can go right up to it. I'll put a door on the side facing the table saw, because I need to be able to reach in there to change the speeds on the router. I've built a frame around my insert, and this is very close tolerance, but not too tight. Now I just need to put my screws in to get this to stay together, and then this will become my template. There it is. Let's see how it wants to fit in here now. Nice, nice, nice. That's a good fit. Okay, let's take it over to the table. I have changed my mind on one thing here. I had my exclusion zone taped out here, and one of the areas was this that was taped out is for that diagonal brace. And the other thing is this foot on the fence. I would really like it if that didn't slide across, have to jump across my router table insert. So in order to be able to do that, the insert needs to be down here, and that puts that diagonal bar just kind of right in the middle for my fence. So I'm going to take that piece off of my table saw, and I'm going to mount this right about there. So I have several processes to go through here, and I've drawn them all out. So here is step one, and what I need to do for step one is drill a hole. This is my drill bit that is 3/8 of an inch deep and is a 1.5 inch drill bit. So that'll give me 3/4 of an inch radius, and that's what my table saw insert has. So I'm going to drill that right in all four corners here. Now I intend to glue my pattern to this tape underneath it here eventually, but not right now. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to clamp this down so that it's located and I can get it right back to this same spot after I drill these holes. I'm going to need a hole out here in the middle eventually. I mean, most of this is going to get cut out, but just to see how my drill bit can manage through this masonite, or I'm not sure what this stuff is called. I'm going to do one hole just out here in the middle to see what kind of a edge it does. If it chips up real bad, I may have to try something different. So here's my first hole. Let's go. Yeah, that's the fast way. Here we go. Look at that. Boy, it doesn't want to cut through there very bad. Oh man, that's horrible. Chipping the edge out. There. Well, my bit wandered all over the place. That may not happen when I'm tight in the corner. Boy, it sure blistered up the edge. That's nasty. Let's see how thick this is. This is probably going to blow out on the bottom side, but I've got a large area that I don't need, so we'll see what happens. I hate doing it, but I seem to have to rock the thing around to get it to bite in. There we go. Quite a bit of blowout on the bottom side. This is, I'm not sure how thick that is. Let's see what I have here. I've got about 15/16 of thickness there. That may or may not be sufficient. I need to drill the 4 holes in the corners. And they need to be 3/8 of an inch deep. So I've marked on the inside of my template here where when the back side of my drill bit gets down to that hole, to that line that I've made, that's 3/8 of an inch. So I need to do that on all 4 corners, and hopefully when I do this one, I'll be able to keep it in the corner tight so I don't end up with it wandering all over the place. Plus, I don't really like the idea, but I think I'm gonna try rocking it a little bit in the beginning to try to get a cleaner cut on the masonite. So here we go. That looks like it. Well, I took a little chunk out of my template there. That's not great. That means my hole is over a little ways. Here we go. Hey, how about that? That's a good deal. That looks like 3/8 right there. 2 down, 2 to go. Is that loose? Yeah. 1 to go. I'm losing battery power here. Okay, I think I've got it. Now I'm adding these spacers to the bottom side of my template, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm just going to use CA glue on this. Okay, that looks like it bonded pretty good. Okay, now I got my spacer blocks on here. Now this needs to go right like this, so I'm gonna turn it this way. And I'm going to start with the glue on here. And then I'm going to spray the tape like that. And then this turns this way. And I get right in between my spacers here. Come on now, go in there. Good, good. Okay. And land right there. Okay. Step 2 is rough cut the inside of this out, so it's going to be completely open. Now, what I found out is my blue tape is 1 1/4 inches, and if you looked at that drawing, you saw that I need to stay 1 1/4 inches away from the edge. That's where I'm going to be routering up to, but of course I don't want to take the full cut with the router. So I'm just going to stay like 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch away from my blue tape here with the Sawzall. So this is just going to be nasty, but this is how it's going to go. This is also going to be loud. I think I've done enough damage. Step 3, I've added a 7/8 inch spacer all the way around here. I mitered the corners and I've taped the bottom side and I've taped the top side. But these are a real snug fit. They're not glued in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this flush cutter right here And then it's going to go down. Ah, shit. Got my flush cutter in here with the top bearing, and I'm going to run around now on the inside here. Now this isn't going to come through all the way, which is just too bad. But then I'm going to come back after I take this off, and then I'll be able to run another flush cutter around what I do get done. So let's see how this goes. Also, I added this huge plate to the router so that I've got better balance on my cutting here. So that's where we're at right here. Well, that's not really working. I was riding real close to the top of my pattern. I've now dropped it down clear to the bottom of the pattern. I think I'm going to get a better result this time. Here we go. Okay, that's the opening for the router to fit through. I've got a little bit of trimming to do because my cutter just wasn't quite long enough to reach through there, but we're far enough now, so this worked out. Okay, step 5, you see, step 5 is just the hole through, and we still got the template on here, and here's my 7/8 of an inch shelf. That's what the router insert is going to sit on. Now I just need to trim this down as far as my holes are, the 3/8 of an inch. And this is the reason why I needed to prop this up a little bit. It's because of the cutter I have. It's this cutter right here. This cutter is so deep, I had to space my template up high enough that I could get just 3/8 of an inch off of this area right here. I'm not going to make this whole cut in with one depth. I'm going to make one pass, and then I'm going to lower it and get it with the second pass. Wait a minute. Step 5 includes adding these little 1/4 by 1/4 inch blocks into the corners here. What that does is that keeps me from running my small diameter radius down into these corners and ruining my nice radius that I put in here for the router insert plate. That's going to match the, what is it, a 1/2 inch radius, a 3/4 inch radius here. So by putting these in the corner, my bearing will bounce off of here and will come around, and I'll only get the straight areas, and I won't end up going down into the corners. Okay, here's how it went. My template was not hard enough, or I didn't have enough of the bearing hitting it. So my template actually got dented. And of course, anything that the bearing followed also got cut into my tabletop. So I didn't end up with as nice a cut as what I was hoping to get. Here's a real spot right there. You can see where that was my first pass here, and then my second pass had a little more surface area. So you can see I got a ridge down there, which I think I'll go after with a chisel. I got to measure the depth though and see if I'm down far enough. I think I am because I'm lower than what my drilled holes were. Well, not this one. Well, those were not drilled very accurately. I mean, I was just kind of eyeballing it by a pencil mark. Anyway, I think I might be there. Okay, just completed step 6. Now step 7 is pull this pattern off of here. Now this should come off with the tape. I think it's working. Yes. And step 8 is finished. I'm going to have to drop the router in there and see how it fits. For a first test fit here, I wanted it to be nice and tight, so it's not too surprising that this didn't fit. I'll come back with a file and a chisel and just really hone this in nice and tight. The lift is in now and fairly flush, but it actually is sticking up a little bit on the edges. But I think it actually can come down further. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install the screws that hold the plate down next. And I'm going to tighten those up, and then I'll be able to see exactly where we are as far as flush. And then afterwards I can come in. If I have to push it up, I've got all these set screws that can lift the thing back up. Now Jesm sent these very nice screws, countersunk, that are used to hold this down. But of course, that's a machine screw, and I don't want to try to thread a machine screw into wood. So I have a couple of choices here. I can use this kind of a T-nut that's got those barbs on it, or I could use, this is like a threaded insert. Now, the one that I think will hold the best is this one. So that's what I'm going to use. Now, this needs to be mounted from the bottom side. I've already marked the location of the holes, and now I'm just going to clamp this to the underside so that the holes are backed up a little bit so I don't get a lot of blowout. This is what I suspected. Once I put these screws in and really tightened it down, now it's below the surface, whereas before it was above. So there was, I don't know, a little bit of of wood just hanging out in there that was just holding it up a little bit, that just needed to be compressed. But either way, if I'd have had those T-nuts put in from the top, all I'd be doing with these screws now is just pulling the T-nuts out. But because they're in on the bottom, they can actually draw up pretty tight. So I think those are pretty neat little pieces of hardware. In these set screws next that hold up the router lift and make it nice and flush. But I want them to land on a firm foundation. So I'm going to put these short wood screws in first. And then when the set screw comes down, it'll land on the wood screw and be nice and solid. This screw happens to be a nice size to center in these holes. I'm going to use that to mark the location of these holes before I drill. I add a little bit of glue to these holes so that the threads have something decent to bite into that's nice and firm for these foundational screws. I ended up coming back with a file and filing some of these down. I didn't countersink them well enough to get them to lay flush, but they are nice and smooth now. My first test fit, these were kind of holding the plate up a little bit, but now it should be nice and flush. All right, now I'm going to use the large screws to pull it down, and I'm going to get the whole thing below the surface of the table saw, and then I'm going to loosen these screws up, and then we'll use the other set screws to push it back up until it's nice and flush. So this is going to pull it down first. Okay, nice and snug. Boy, that sure made a difference, didn't it? Okay, the entire surface is below the surface of the table here. So now I'm going to loosen these screws up. All right, now I'm ready for my set screws. And neatly down inside each one of these holes is the head of the screw for my set screw to land on. So that's very cool. God, these are tight. All right, I've got them all in. Pretty good, and look. Doesn't that look nice? So that turned out really nice. Now I've got my router plate mounted in my table saw. And some of the finer points about how I did it is these little squares here in the corner. And of course what that did is that made it so that my flush cutter stepped around these outside or these inside radiuses here without me accidentally mowing into them with a 1/4 inch radius bit. That would have ruined those corners. So that's something I haven't seen anybody else do. The other thing I did was I took these blocks of wood and I mounted those along the inside, and I basically just taped those in there, and then that gave me a 7/8 of an inch shelf there, which made it so that I could put those threaded inserts in here, so this machine screw can be pulled nice and tight down by that T-nut in there. So the little squares in the corners, these offset spacers, and being able to get that 7/8 of an inch shelf in there. Number 4, the wood screws that are below each of the set screws, so that the set screws have something solid to land on so that they can push the router insert up and get it nice and flush and have it stay up. Some of you may have noticed an error that I have here that I didn't think of. So here's what the situation is. So you've got your fence over here mounted right where you want it for making a cut, and let's say you need to raise the fence up a little bit. Well, I can get on the raise and lower part with my crank, but I can't get to the lock because it's underneath here. This should have been mounted this way. These two controls here need to be outside of the fence. This whole side here could be covered with the fence, so I should have rotated it this way. But as you recall from the beginning, I was trying to get everything located over here as close as I could. So that's that's not good. So here's the lock mechanism here. I just unlocked it. Now I can run it up and down. So let's say I had already very carefully fine-tuned where I wanted my fence to be, and now I needed to make another adjustment to my router height. I can do that. I have a workaround. Here is the workaround. It's this little stop system. So let's say I get my router fence exactly where I want it. Now I can bring this over, push that up, bring it over, tighten it down there, and let's say I need to raise my router bit. I can release the fence, come in here, unlock it, and then go over to the crank and crank it up or down or whatever I need to do, and then come back over here and lock it. And now I can return the fence to exactly the same place. So it would have been better had I had that insert rotated into the correct orientation, but this little device right here is going to make it so that I can save my setup and come right back to it. So kind of a nifty deal. I can also use this on my table saw fence too, so I thought it was kind of a nice little feature. It ended up costing me another $40, so a little bit of a misstep there. I thought those were some nice features that I was able to do with this template. And then I used the same method that everyone else used, where I put a piece of tape down and then I CA glued it to the countertop. And of course then the tape just pulled off, and you can see where the CA glue held the tape there. These spacers here was because I only had these really long flush cutters, so I actually had to lift up my template quite a ways. Now, some of the misses I had, if you look here, my bearing actually dug into the side of this plywood here. It's kind of surprising. I thought this was fairly hard wood, but it did, and that it dug in, so that kind of made my opening a little bit bigger than what I really wanted. But yet it still was pretty tight. I had to come back and do some sanding and some filing to get this to work. The last thing I have is I've made this little bit of a workstation here that goes along with my router table. And what it is I don't want to have to go hunting for all of the tools that go with it, including this little crank. So all I did is I put 2 screw eyes down here in the bottom of this, so this little crank will stay right there. Here's my wrenches for light tightening and loosening router bits here. This is for my other Bosch router. And then here's the different diameter inserts that go with the JESM router lift. I just have the 2 Allen wrenches that are used for tightening the screws and adjusting the set screws. I just kept those right here. And then I put a hole in this, so here's the tool for removing the inserts here, so that always stays out of the way. It's not just on my table. And then I think the neatest thing is this little guy here. This I think would be pretty easy to lose. So I put a threaded insert on the bottom of this little board right here. So that way, when I'm not using this, I can just screw it right up here, screw it on right here, and it isn't going to get lost. This is the sort of thing that could get sucked up in a shop vac or a dust collector and then be gone. So if you picked up a couple of ideas here, I haven't seen anybody else do these things here, and I thought they worked out pretty good for my hole to be cut into my table saw extension wing, which this was really a nerve-wracking thing for me. I've had this extension wing. I built this, oh my gosh, probably 15 years ago. I'm just now getting around to mounting a router into it. I've got dust collection nearby, so I'll be doing that in another video. So anyway, what I wanted to ask you was if you would consider subscribing and like this video, maybe share this video with somebody else if you know somebody is considering doing something like this with the router. Good, good, good.